Hey, I'm Jesse. Let's have a devotion. We're in the book of Esther, but I'm going to show you how God has been at work for a long time, setting the stage for the book of Esther. In Ezra's account, he's mostly been talking about his predecessor Zerubbabel, but then in chapter 4, beginning in verse 6, going all the way to verse 23, there's like this big parenthetical where he gives all these examples ahead of time about the kind of opposition that the Jewish people experienced in rebuilding the temple. How, man, it was opposition before, and it's opposition now, and it's opposition after. So it's sort of like a J.J. Abrams Lost Season 3 flash forward kind of moment. And it's even in a different language. It's in Aramaic. So these guys have sent a letter to King Artaxerxes. That is the son of the king in the book of Esther. And in today's text, we're going to see Artaxerxes' reply. The king sent a reply to his chief deputy, Rehum, Shishmai the scribe, and the rest of their colleagues living in Samaria and elsewhere in the region west of the Euphrates River. Again, this is the Trans-Euphrates region. And by the way, the Persians had a pretty efficient system. They could get a letter to this guy and a response in about a week. The letter you sent us has been translated from Aramaic and read in my presence. I issued a decree and a search was conducted. It was discovered that this city has had uprising against kings since ancient times, and there have been rebellions and revolts in it. Powerful kings have also ruled over Jerusalem and exercised authority over the whole region west of the Euphrates River, and tribute, duty, and land tax were paid to them. Therefore, issue an order for these men to stop, so that this city will not be rebuilt until a further decree has been pronounced by me. See that you may not neglect this matter, otherwise the damage will increase and the royal interests will suffer. As soon as the text of King Artaxerxes' letter was read to Rehum, Shishmai the scribe, and their colleagues, they immediately went to the Jews in Jerusalem and forcibly stopped them. So this is the parenthetical. Here we flash back again to King Darius, and that's going to lead directly into the first verse of chapter 5. But we can see that the bad guys seem to win, that they get away with it, that Artaxerxes, the son of Ahasuerus, who's Xerxes, he's deceived by them. He's swayed by the case that they make. And the case that they make is a similar one that's being made now for the taxation of churches. What's been lost completely on modern day Americans is what separation of church and state actually is. It's to protect the church from the state. It always has been, to keep from conflating the two, wherein heads of state are also the head of the church. This was written in a letter from Thomas Jefferson to a Baptist association, describing a wall of separation between church and state. These founding fathers had known for a long time, centuries prior, the utter catastrophes that come when heads of state are also given authority to dictate what happens in churches and able to influence the spending of church funds, for example. And when that wall doesn't exist, guess who takes over? The state takes over. And then the results are always catastrophic. And it seems always to lead to a loss of human life. That may sound overly dramatic unless you have like a thimbleful of knowledge of history. So here's Artaxerxes saying, hey, I'm going to get some of that. It looks like other guys have ruled these guys in the past. He has no clue about his own lineage. He has completely forgotten where his throne came from and what it is for and what his father did. So sorry for the flash forward and kind of the spoiler of the sequel to what happens after the life and legacy of Esther. But Ahasuerus' son is just as easily influenced as his father was by the bad guys, unfortunately. At least in the book of Esther, though, the king is listening to Esther. At least he's listening to what Esther says, and at least he's also finally going to start listening to Mordecai as we get deeper into the narrative. But poor Artaxerxes, man, he fell for it hard. He didn't know what these uprisings were. He doesn't know that God founded his ancestor Cyrus's throne for the express purpose of delivering Israel from those who persecuted them and overly taxed them. And by the way, I mean, if you know the New Testament, you also know that taxation is only going to get worse, because guess who's coming after the Persians? The Romans are going to be even worse. And in fact, it'll be the Romans who end up sacking Jerusalem again in another 500 years after all of this. Every generation has its turn. Every generation faces this. The idea of like, no, we got to tax the people of God. We got to tax churches. That's not a new thing. This is a text that was written. This is describing events from 536 BC originally in Ezra's context, and then beyond into the future of Artaxerxes' reign. Over and over again, there are these strongly written letters, and they traveled along an ancient Persian road system, and they arrived about a week later. And today, we are just as depraved. Everything that has happened before happens again now. Instead of taking a week to get there, we have an information superhighway. And everything that you want to write that's hateful against Christians and completely ignorant of the consequences of trying to erode the separation of church and state, you can make the same exact stupid, harmful argument. There's nothing new, man. There's nothing new. This is the Old Testament. This is the centuries before Christ was even born. The same kind of arguments were being had over and over again. And so, man, my prayer is that you, as you take your turn inheriting Esther's legacy as the one strategically positioned right there in the devil's den, perhaps even against your will, just like Esther was. Who knows? It may be that for exactly a time like this that you've been appointed to where you are and when you are. We studied the book of Esther, who risked absolutely everything. She risked her life for the cause of the people of God. She stood when it was her time. My prayer is that you would have the guts, like Esther, to stand when it's your time. And then you pray for our kids, the next generation, that they will stand when it's their time, if the Lord tarries.